All right, everyone, I'm going to call this meeting to order at 3:06 p.m. But before we begin, the SFSS respectfully acknowledges its location on the traditional unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, including the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Coquitlam, and Katzie nations. Unceded means that these territories have never been handed over, sold, or given up by these nations, and we are currently situated in occupied territories. So I will move on to the roll call of attendance. I'm going to start with myself. Hello, everyone. My name is Judith, she, her pronouns, and all my access needs are met. I'm going to move on to the ex-officio president.
Hi, everyone. My name is Helen. My pronouns are she, her, and all my access needs are met. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to move to VP Finance.
Hi, everyone. My name is Abby. He, him pronouns, all my access needs are met. Thank you.
Mathematics counselor.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ben. Pronouns he, him, and all my access needs are met.
Psychology counselor.
Hi, my name is Mark. Pronouns he, him. All my access needs are met.
Society of Arts and Social Sciences. Hillary is in the chat. Hi all, my name is Hillary, pronouns she, her, access needs are met, except my mic is terrible as always. So I'm going to be typing in the chat. All right, thank you for letting me know, Hillary. I will move on to our society staff. Our policy research and community affairs coordinator sent in regrets, so she will not be attending today. So I'm going to move on to our administrative assistant. And that's Rianne in the chat. Hello, my name is Rianne, she, her pronouns, and all my access needs are met. All right, thank you for being here today, Rianne. Okay, so we can move on to item number 4 on our agenda, which is the consent agenda, which reads, be it resolved to adopt the consent agenda by unanimous consent. In the consent agenda, we have 4.1.1 matters arising from the minutes, and that is our governance minutes from June 20th. Yes. So I am going to seek unanimous consent on this. If you wish to dissent, please raise your hand or indicate in the chat. Seeing none, this passes unanimous consent. We can move to item number 5, adoption of the agenda, which reads, be it resolved to adopt the agenda as presented. I will move. Can I get a second?
President second.
President seconds. Open up the floor for discussion. If you have any amendments, please list yourself in the chat. I'm going to start off with myself. I will have a couple of amendments to today's agenda, ranging from, I'm going to move to strike one of our new business items from the agenda, which is 9.5, recommendations council governance committee updates. I am not quite happy with the way they are, so I'm going to move to strike that and strike discussion item 10.1, electronic voting updates, and 10.2, Discord moderation for SFSS groups. I am also going to review a batch of amendments onto the agenda, which now paste in the chat. So recommendation to council housekeeping changes to R2, that will be the new 9.5. Recommendation to council changes to conflict rules in R4, that's going to be the new 9.10. Recommendation to council housekeeping changes to R5, that's going to be 9.11. Recommendation to council housekeeping changes to R6, it's going to be 9.12. Recommendation to council procedural changes to R7, it's going to be 9.13. Recommendation to council procedural, definitional, and housekeeping changes to SO 18 is going to be 9.14. And yeah, that's going to be all our changes. I'm really sorry, Rianne. All the amendments are dropped in the chat. Sorry. Okay, so I'm going to move this. Can I get a second?
VP Finance.
VP Finance seconds. Opening up the floor for discussion on the amendments. I already sent the committee a couple of the amendments beforehand, but anybody any thoughts, questions? Seeing none, I'm going to move us to vote seeking unanimous consent. If you wish to dissent, please raise your hand or indicate in the chat. Seeing none, the amendment is carried. I will now move back to our main motion, which now reads be it resolved to adopt the agenda as amended. Opening the floor for discussion. Seeing none, I'm going to move to a vote seeking unanimous consent. If you wish to dissent, raise your hand or indicate in the chat. Seeing none, that is carried as amended. All right, folks, we're in for a long one, so I'm going to try to be quick here. So I'm going to move on to new business 9.1. Recommendation to council. R3 updates submitted by myself, which reads, be it resolved that governance committee recommends the following updates and changes to R3 of council policies. R3 updates, whereas numerous updates are required for R3 to make the policy cohesive, be it resolved to strike bylaw 4 subsection 10 to subsection 16 and bylaw 5 subsection 3 from relevant bylaws and replace it with bylaw 7. Be it further resolved to strike bylaw 4 subsection 10 10 to subsection 16 from R 3.3 and 3.1 and replace it with bylaw 7. Be it further resolved to add an extra space in R 3.6 office hours in person or electronically on the SFSS website to read as in person, or be it further resolved to rename the second R3 subsection 7 as a subsection as A, as it is subsidiary to the first R3.7. Be it last resolved to strike the words isn't from R3.11 and 3.12 and replace it with are not. I'm gonna move it. Can I get
Math.
math seconds? Opening the floor for discussion. Just to offer some context, this is genuinely just typo changes. We have a phrase in R3.6 where in person or is literally one word. So we are trying to fix it as the in hyphen person space or, and then we have, for whatever reason, 2 R3.7s, but the second one I think is supposed to be subsidiary, so it should be section A. And then we have an issue where it basically says that exit reports are supposed to take the replace work reports for the spring semester, which is not the case. You kind of need to do both. So that needs to be struck because that's just not how we do things. And then we have weird grammatical isn'ts in policy that should be just are not, because we're not supposed to abbreviate in our policies. That's 1, and 2, it's supposed to be plural. So that's basically what's happening here. Does anybody have any questions on this or anything? If not, that's fine. I'm gonna move this to vote. I'm gonna seek unanimous consent. If you wish to dissent, raise your hand or indicate in the chat. Seeing none, that carries. 9.2 recommendation to council. R8 updates, again submitted by myself. It reads, be it resolved that governance committee recommends the following updates and changes to R8 of council policies. R8 updates, whereas R8 is referencing to wrong bylaws, whereas it is unclear who can fill in as an alternate at council meetings, whereas alternates under bylaw 6 subsection 24B and subsection C are entitled to the same voting, speaking, and in-camera privilege of regular directors. Be it resolved to strike bylaw 17 subsection 7 from relevant bylaws and replace it with bylaw 15 subsection 7. Be it further resolved to add 8.2 subsection A as per membership definition of the SFSS Constitution, and any and all alternate counselors must be in good standing of the society and must be an undergraduate student at SFU. Be it further resolved to add 8.3 subsection A. The appointment of an alternate counselor must be communicated to the president of VP Organizational Development prior to the alternate's attendance at the council meeting. 8.3 subsection A subsection 1. The group shall provide the alternates full name, student number, and student email. Be it last resolved to strike bylaw 17 subsection 7 from R 8.6 and replace it with bylaw 15 subsection 7. I'm going to move. Can I get a second?
VP Finance.
VP Finance seconds. Opening the floor for discussion. There's a list from Abby. Go ahead.
I'm just going to speak to this very briefly. As a counselor from last year, there was absolute utter confusion in who was allowed to be an alternate. And I think there were many concerns, including confidentiality concerns, as regular counselors do have to sign some form of an NDA, but alternates do not. So I think this is a really good first step to making sure council is protecting itself and the appropriate people are representing the constituents they're supposed to represent.
I also placed myself on the list. So the main reason we're adding this in is while groups are expected to officially appoint their alternates, counselors are eligible up to 2 alternates. Most don't. They don't do it properly. And the biggest issue is when we're doing roll call at council meetings and somebody thinks they're an alternate and we were unaware of them coming as an alternate, we can't really stop the meeting and be like, stop, prove it. And that puts us in a very uncomfortable position where we could be liable if that person is not a real alternate, or that they are a real alternate and we just annoyed an entire student group. So it is something that should be communicated to us. It is in our policies that if counselors are sending an alternate, it's supposed to let the chair know, but that's usually not done. And we also want to make sure that whoever is being sent, given that our council is growing, is a regular undergraduate student at SFU in good standing in society, and is not being sent somebody from like a random institution who happens to be our associate member or something. And this should be communicated to the chair and myself, mostly because I kind of oversee counselors and the chair should know who they're calling on during meetings. And again, we should probably know who they are. We should be able to verify them as a legitimate student, hence a student number and a student email. That's something we collect for our counselors normally anyway. So it should not be a overly big deal, I don't think. But yeah. Anybody have any questions, thoughts? Seeing none, I am going to move this to a vote. I will seek unanimous consent. If you wish to dissent, raise your hand or list yourself in the chat. Seeing none, that carries unanimously. We can now move on to item 9.3, recommendation to council, our 17 updates. Again, something for myself, which reads, be it resolved, the governance committee recommends the following updates and changes to R17 of council policies, AVP hours requirements and updates. Whereas associate vice president's AVP for executive committee members do not exist in bylaw, only in policy, whereas AVPs are unpaid and are required to work at least 15 hours weekly for the executive officer, whereas there is not enough funding to pay AVPs for their work, whereas AVPs may be non-executive council members, but can also be non-council member students. Be it resolved to strike relevant bylaw section from R17. Be it further resolved to fix the missing space in R17.1 and R17.1.a. Be it lastly resolved to strike R17.5 and replace it with associate vice president shall work no more than 10 hours per week. I will move. Can I get a second?
Math.
Matt seconds. Opening the floor for discussion. If nobody has any questions, I can just talk about this. So this has been something that has been bothering me ever since February. And I have voiced my issues about this at the time to the, president, I think, you're still acting president, I think, yes. Asking people to work 15 hours at minimum weekly, unpaid, is the epitome of what's wrong with society. So I am not in favor of that. If we could pay them, it'd be a different story. At that point, we have to have set hours for them. But because we can't afford to pay AVPs, and my biggest concern being that these people can be non-council members, so they're already not getting paid to begin with. It's not fair to expect that much work for free, because that 15 hours at first is a minimum per week. So at that point, it's basically they're working at least half as much as their executive officer is, except the executive officer is getting paid. They're not, which I don't think that should be allowed. So I think it should be capped at 10 hours per week. That's quite frankly enough free labor. I don't think we should be requesting more. Even if it's a council member, a non-executive counselor who's serving as an AVP, it's still plenty. Because they're supposed to be working, what, 20 hours per month? Like, requesting them to work 15 per week is basically nearly like all of their requirements for a month. So no, that should not be a thing. So we should cap it at 10 hours. I don't think that's a controversial thing. Healer in the chat, I agree. Does anybody wish to speak to this? If that's, oh yeah, go ahead, Abby.
I'll throw in a really brief piece. If one day we do want to pay AVPs, that this is better for that, just because then you're paying them for a max of 10 hours. So you have an automatic upper cap, so you can actually budget for it. Whereas with a minimum of 15 hours, they could work 100 hours, right? You don't know. So how much are you supposed to pay? Impossible to budget for. Now we have an upper cap, and what I think is a more reasonable upper cap. So I'm in favor of this.
Yeah, I agree. And 10 hours per week is still more than non-executive counselors. Like, yeah, I don't think it's unreasonable. Again, I guess I don't have an AVP, so I can't relate, but I don't think it's unreasonable. Is there any further discussion on this matter? Seeing none, I'm going to move us to a vote. I will seek unanimous consent. If you wish to dissent, please raise your hand or indicate in the chat. Seeing none, that carried unanimously. We can move on to 9.4, recommendation to council, SO1 updates. Submitted by myself. Which reads, be it resolved that governance committee recommends the following updates and changes to SO1 of council policies, SO1 updates. Whereas there are numerous spacing and numbering errors in SO1, whereas it is unclear how committee meetings are meant to be called without a defined chair. Be it resolved to add section 1.12 in SO1 to read as the following. 1.12, whereby the chair of a committee is not defined in the composition and standing order of the committee. The president will be tasked with calling the first meeting of the committee, where the chair must be elected. I'm going to move this. Can I get a second?
Math.
Now seconds. Opening the floor for discussion. Go ahead, Ben.
Is there a reason why you're proposing that only the chair must be elected instead of both the chair and the vice chair?
Yes, we can live without a vice chair that can be elected at any point. We do kind of need a chair in order to ensure that meetings can be called. Ideally, we would elect the vice chair during the first meeting, but that's up to the discussion of the committee. You could elect it later. It's not really a big deal. Okay, I guess I'm next on the list, and the reason I'm being hesitant is because I think there was a mistake when I submitted this motion. I think I'm going to move to amend this motion to add an additional be it resolved clause that reads, be it further resolved to renumber as attached in SO1. What was the attachment name? SO1 reviewed by JN. Because I think I forgot to add the be it resolved clause about the renumbering. Okay, I'm going to move that, I guess. Math seconds. I'm going to open up the public discussion on this. Seeing that, I'm going to move it to the vote. Seeking unanimous consent, if you wish to stand and raise your hand, or let's just open the chat. Okay, seeing none, we can move back to the main motion, which now has an additional be it resolved clause that reads, be it further resolved to renumber as attached in SO1 reviewed by JN. So I'm going to move this to vote. I'm going to seek unanimous consent. If you wish to stand, please raise your hand or let's just open the chat. Seeing none, that carries as amended. Sorry, folks. I can move on to 9.5, recommendation to council. That is no longer a recommendation. Recommendation to council, housekeeping changes to R2, which will read, be it resolved that governance committee formally approves the following recommendation to council, housekeeping changes to R2, whereas there's a minor error in R2 based on the inconsistent wording due to the past amendments not fully considering all language that exists in R2. Be it resolved to amend R2.7 by striking the word semi-monthly and replacing it with monthly. I will move. Can I get a second? Math seconds. Opening the floor for discussion. Go ahead, Ben.
Basically, the reason for this motion is somebody forgot to strike semi-monthly and replace it with monthly when we switched counselors to monthly work reports.
Awesome, thank you. Any other thoughts, questions, comments? Seeing none, I will move this to votes. I will seek unanimous consent. If you wish to stand, please raise your hand or indicate in the chat. Seeing none. That's carried. We can move on to 9.10, recommendation to council, changes to conflict rules in R4, which reads, be it resolved that governance committee formally approves the following recommendation to council. Changes to conflict rules in R4, whereas concurrently serving as an executive of a group that operates within the SFSS and as an SFSS executive could give rise to potential conflicts of interest. Whereas bylaw 13 subsection 3 outlines a basic framework for preventing this, although there is no enforcement measures outlined within any council policies. Whereas one method of ensuring that these rules is a stipend reduction under R4, be it resolved to amend R4 by adding a new heading, conflict in seats held, that contains a new R4.17 that reads, 4.17 executive officers may not sit as an executive of a faculty, student union, department, student union, constituency group, affiliated student group, or a club at the same time as they are a member of the executive committee. Be it further resolved to amend R4.17 by adding a new subsection A that reads, The stipend of an executive officer will be reduced by $100 when they fail to comply with this rule. Be it further resolved to renumber the policy accordingly. I will move. Can I get a second?
VP Finance.
VP Finance seconds. Open the floor for discussion. This is basically to ensure that we do not have people, basically, for lack of a better word, double dipping when it comes to executive committee. It could be very problematic for an executive to hold a seat as an executive officer in different groups as well, and while they serve as an executive officer for the SFSS. There could be times where the group's interest conflict with the SFSS's overall interests. There may be times when it would be inappropriate for an executive officer to have privy to conversation within a student group who falls under the SFSS. Overall, it's just a logistical and ethical nightmare. So I think that this should be added in to ensure that we do not run into situations where executive officers may not have the best intentions in remaining part of student groups. But it's just my personal take. I'm gonna pass the floor to Ben.
I'm gonna amend the motion by striking the words affiliated student group in the revised R17.
Okay. Ben
R4.17, excuse me.
yes. Ben moves. Can I get a second?
VP Finance.
VP Finance seconds. I will open up the floor for discussion on this. Yes, go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, the reason behind proposing this is that while FSUs, DSUs, constituency groups, and clubs all do have well-defined executives under member services and groups policies, affiliated student groups don't necessarily.
Okay. All right. I am going to move this to a vote. I will seek unanimous consent, given the fact that nobody's going to be opposing it. If you wish to dissent, please raise your hand and list yourself in the chat. Seeing none, that carries. So we can head back to the main motion, which basically is the same way, except 4.17 now will read executive officers may not sit as an executive of a faculty, student union, department, student union, constituency group, or club at the same time as they are a member of the executive committee. So, given that it appears that the list is exhausted on this motion. Oh, except it isn't. All right, go ahead, VP Finance.
Yes, sorry, I was on there twice. Quick thing I wanted to point out just for those who watch this recording back. One particular area of vulnerability is the VP Finance and Services itself, as I would know. Signing off on checks of more than $1,000 or more for your particular student union or whatever you're affiliated with could be a potential area of conflict of interest. And that's where my primary concern, beyond anything else, beyond the voting or anything like that, that's where my primary concern would be, the monetary aspect.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else care to add anything? Seeing none, I'm going to move this to a vote. I'm going to seek unanimous consent. If you wish to stand, please raise your hand or list yourself in the chat. Seeing none, that carries as amended. We can move on to 9.11. Recommendation to council housekeeping changes to R5. It will read, be it resolved that governance committee formally approves the following recommendations to council. Housekeeping changes to R5. Whereas R5 has several minor errors and typo spelling mistakes that need to be corrected to ensure the consistency of the policy with established practice. Be it resolved to amend R5.1 by striking it and replacing it with 5.1. Proper operations of a democratic student organization requires that students elected or appointed to council or a society committee be duly responsible to the membership. To this end, it is imperative that be it further resolved to amend R5.3 by striking R5.3 and replacing it with members of council and society committees shall not. Be it further resolved to amend our 5.3 by adding the word the in between the words at and council in our 5.3 subsection 3 subsection C 3 and 5. Be it further resolved to amend our 5.4 by striking the phrase with council or council initiating the proceedings for removal from our 5.4C. But be it further resolved to renumber the policy accordingly. I will move. Can I get a second?
VP Finance.
VP Finance seconds. Open the floor for discussion. Go ahead, Ben.
Do have an amendment to make to this because I realized there is a typo in it. So where it says be it further resolved to amend our 5.3 by adding the words the in between the words at and council in our 5.3 C3 5,
Yeah.
I want to amend that last part to read in between the words at and council in our 5.3 C5.
3C5. So no 3 before 5.
Yeah, that's a typo.
Okay. All right, I will second that amendment. Open the floor for discussion. Seeing none, I will call this to a vote. Seeking unanimous consent, if you wish to consent, please raise your hand or list yourself in the chat. Seeing none, that is carried. So we're now back to the main motion, which reads the same way, except it's now our 5.3 subsection C. Subsection 5. All right, Ben, you're on the list twice. Go ahead.
So to sort of explain what this motion actually does, so the amendment to R5.3, currently it reads members of council of committees shall not, which doesn't make much sense. So I'm suggesting that we reword it to members of council and society committees. And then in 5.3C5, it just says at council table when it should arguably say at the council table. In terms of the amendment to R5.4, it's redundant to say with council or council initiating proceedings for removal. And the amendment to R5.1 that I'm proposing is that we remove the enforcement or remove the applicability of R5 to students elected or appointed to university committees, because the enforcement measures outlined in R5 aren't really applicable in some sense.
Okay, thank you. Anybody with questions, thoughts? Seeing none, I will move this to a vote. I will seek unanimous consent. If you wish to dissent, raise your hand or indicate in chat. I thought for a second that was a dissent. But seeing no dissent, that carries as amended. We can move on to 9.12, which is recommended to council. Housekeeping changes to R6, which reads, be it resolved that governance committee formally approves the following recommendation to council. Housekeeping changes to R6, whereas R6 has several minor issues that should be corrected to ensure that the policy is worded correctly in the event that it needs to be applied. Be it resolved to strike the first point in the relevant bylaw section and replace it with bylaw 15, but be it further resolved to amend R6 by striking R6.9 subsection C and replacing it with be submitted at least 1 hour in advance of the meeting in question. Be it further resolved to amend R6.11 by striking the word body organizational unit and replace it with body. I will move. Can I get a second?
Math.
Math seconds. Open the floor for discussion. Go ahead then.
I'm also going to move another amendment to strike the first be it resolved clause outlined in the recommendation.
Be it resolved to strike the first point.
Be it resolved to strike the first point in relevant bylaws and replace, yeah.
Okay. Then moves. Can I get a second?
Finance.
Weekly Finance. Second, open the floor for discussion on this amendment. Go. Okay, go ahead then, if that's the current list, I'm not sure.
It's not the current list.
Okay, good. Selena, there's no discussion on this. I'm gonna move this to a vote. I will seek unanimous consent. If you wish to dissent, please raise your hand or indicate in the chat. Seeing none, that carries. So we are gonna move back to the main motion, which now we'll read, where there's some minor typos that should be corrected to ensure that the policy is worded correctly in the event that it needs to be applied. Be it resolved to amend R6 by striking R6.9, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the first be it resolved clause is gone. Open the floor for discussion. Seeing none. I will see. Yes, Abby?
I have
I list on the chat.
Yes, Ben, go ahead.
Just to explain these two changes for the amendment to 6.9C, it's that currently we say that regrets have to be submitted at least 1 hour in advance. And for 6.11, just using the word body there is fine. We don't need to say body organizational unit.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, thoughts? Going once, going twice. Okay, I'm gonna move this to vote, seeking unanimous consent. If you wish to dissent, please raise your hand or indicate in the chat. Seeing none, that is carried as amended. We can move on to, oh my God, there's something more. 9.13, recommendation to council, procedural changes to R7, which will now read, be it resolved that governance committee formally approves the following recommendations to council, procedural changes to R7, whereas R7 has numerous procedures in it that are completely inconsistent with established practices by the previous chair or chairs of council. Whereas R7 should be corrected to ensure that the procedures within it are consistent with established practice, so that council begins to follow the policy as written. Be it resolved to amend R7.21 by striking all occurrences of board within R7 subsection R7.21 and replacing it with council. Be it further resolved to amend R7.23 by striking all of R7.23. Be it further resolved to amend R7.24 by striking is not and replacing it with is not. Be it further resolved to amend R7.30 by striking all of it and replacing it with the agenda, time, and location of council meetings shall be published on the society website and or social media prior to those meetings. Be it further resolved to fix the indenting. I will move. Can I get a second?
Math.
Now, second, I will open the floor for discussion. Go ahead, Ben.
So to explain a few things about this motion. First of all, in R7.21 and 23, in 7.21, we refer to council as the board, which hasn't happened, which is not what we call ourselves. In 7.23, we outline a procedure for the consent agenda being attached to the agenda of a council meeting, which has literally never happened since this policy was enacted. In 7.24, it's just fixing is not to is not with a space in it. And with 7.30, it's that we outline that the agenda, time, and location of emergency council meetings should also be published to the Society's website, yet we don't define what an emergency council meeting is anywhere. And just saying that it has to be published for council meetings automatically would cover any form of council meeting.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Anybody else have any questions, thoughts? If no one really has anything to say, I'll put myself on the list because this was actually something that happened, I think, in the spring where people didn't know about like special council meetings. And that was a very big issue. A lot of people were like, oh, SFSS is having secret meetings that nobody's telling anybody about. So yeah, if you can just make sure it doesn't happen, that's probably a good idea. So I'm in favor of these changes. Anybody else? Thoughts? Seeing none, I will move this to vote. I will seek unanimous consent. If you wish to dissent, raise your hand or indicate in the chat. Seeing none, that is carried unanimously. Yay. And I believe that brings us to the end of our new business section. So we will now move on to section 10, which is discussion items.
I'm pretty sure it doesn't. We have the amendments to SO 18 to still recommend, I believe.
Did I double flip? Oh, yes, we do. My apologies. I got too optimistic here. So 9.14, recommendation to council procedural, definitional, and the housekeeping change to SO 18. All right, one more, let's go. Be it resolved that governance committee formally approves the following recommendations to council, procedural, definitional, and housekeeping change to SO 18. Be it resolved to strike point 1 in relevant bylaws and replace it with bylaw 7. Be it further resolved to amend SO 18.3 by striking involves and replacing it with involves and replacing it with involves with the correct spelling. Be it further resolved to strike the 8th point in the composition section of SO 18. Be it further resolved to strike the 10th point in composition section of SO 18, but further resolved to strike constraints and replace it with constraints. Be it further resolved to amend SO 18.10 by adding a new section, subsection A, that reads, A, notwithstanding SO 18.10, the committee may not approve additional funding for projects while funding has been granted for that project by council. Be further resolved to strike SO 18.11 and replacing it with SO 18.12 and renumber accordingly. Be it further resolved to amend SO 18.19 by striking annual budget and replacing it with annual budgets. I will move. Can I guess?
VP Finance.
Be fine. Second, opening the floor for discussion. Go ahead, Ben.
So to explain these amendments, for a lot of them are just minor typo fixes and like fixing that admin assistants are listed as a non-voting member of the committee and just removing an empty section in the committee's TOR. In terms of the one big substantive change is adding this new SO 18.10A, which would basically prevent Spock from approving more than council would have originally authorized, which seems like a relevant addition.
Okay. Anyone have any questions, thoughts? A list again from Ben. All right, go ahead.
I'm going to move an amendment to remove the first be it resolved clause from the recommendation.
Be it resolved to strike point 1 in relevant bylaw. Yep. Okay. I will second. Opening the floor for discussion on this. I'm not going to list myself. I'm going to ask point blank why.
Because this is already the bylaw that's in there.
Okay. Cool. Thank you. Have you had any other discussion on this amendment? No worries. Seeing no discussion on this, I'm going to move it to a vote. I will seek unanimous consent. If you wish to dissent, please raise your hand or indicate in the chat. Seeing none. That's carried. Moving back to the main motion, which reads the same. Really, it's just the first beat resolve clause is now gone. Discussion on this? No? All right, cool. I will move it to a vote. I will seek unanimous consent. If you wish to dissent, raise your hand or indicate in the chat. All right, seeing no dissent, that is carried as amended. And now it truly brings the end to new business. And now we will move on to discussion item. And the only discussion item remaining on the agenda is policy review check-in. So at this point in time, I'd like to congratulate to all of us. It appears we have finished almost all of our assigned policy reviews as of today. I'm just pulling up our tracker right now, and it appears we have reviewed privacy and information management, orientation and retention. We have one item on member services that I think we need to get legal on, but the rest is reviewed. Council policies is reviewed. And then election referenda is completely reviewed. And it appears, I think, corporate record is also reviewed. So it appears we are on track, which is great. What isn't great is that we have a lot of action required on this tracker. In fact, I'm pretty sure we have more of that than anything else. So yeah, action required for literally all of them. So I think we're going to spend the next week or so just drafting notices and making sure we can push those through council and just get those fixed. Those that do not require action, I think we can sign off on and say it's reviewed and move on with our day, which is great. The ones that we need to fix, we need to push notices through the 2-week period, has to be on the website, has to be on council agenda, the whole shtick. Council has to vote on it and they can still vote no, as we have seen prior. And then we have to send the finalized language to Edie so she can reconcile the policy. So yay for us, kind of. Yeah, it's good. I think we need to go and get those signed off on, and provided that we do so in time-ish, question mark, we can move on to our next batch, which at this point should be retail services policies and the policy manual. Yes. So yeah, we can move on to those starting tomorrow, I guess, once we're done with these ones and the notices for it, which is great because the policy manual is pretty short, and retail services policies is also short, but I don't think that's supposed to be short. So we probably want to go and track down the missing policies, because if you look, we are actually missing, I think, 4 out of 5 of them. Like, I mean, missing, I mean, they're not in the document, but they're supposed to be. So that's gonna be fun. But in other news, we are looking relatively good in terms of review. Something I wanted to bring to the attention of the committee is orientation and retention policies. And as people here at the committee know, I have written a new section, which is called OTP3. We already have an OTP3, which means you have to renumber the policies. You're welcome. But the new OTP3 is basically outline training for incoming executive counselors, mostly because as being part of the first like real transition, it was a rocky one. And a lot of things were not talked to us that should have been. And I want to make sure the next incoming exec don't feel like they were dropped in a deep end like we were. So it outlines basic curriculum, basically from talking to departments, building operations, how to chair meetings, all these things. And it'd be really good if people here could like review it and like give their thoughts on it before I pass it on to relevant staff, because it has to be passed on to relevant staff before we push it to council, mostly because we do have management people who are named in the policy, and if it changes, it will affect their way of operating. So we do need to run it past them before anything substantial changes. But in regards to their roles, nothing really changes other than some wording and some grammar fixes, because there's some questionable things in that policy. And it's not because of content, but more because of it's just the grammar makes it really hard to understand what they meant. So fixing that would be probably a good idea. But yeah, it should be okay, question mark. Once we have it run past departments, we can bring that back to recommendation to council, or not next governance meeting, and push the recommendation to council, hopefully. But so far so good, I would say. But yeah, in terms of my policy reviews, there was nothing crazy in the sections that I was reviewing for the privacy and information management one, just minor typos, BD's role yet again being mismanaged. But that's pretty much it. I caught up on the rest of the reviews that I signed up for, and nothing crazy was wrong with them. So we should be good to go, but I can pass this on to somebody else in terms of their reviews and what they saw and what needed to be fixed. If anybody wants to. Yeah, go ahead, Abby.
There we go. Excuse me. Looking through these standing orders that I looked through, there was typos obviously going to be in every policy here and there, but one of the common issues, and I think Ben might have flagged this as well, is in the top right, it talks about when the policies have been updated, and I believe it's inaccurate for almost every single policy. I think the only one, I think that's actually the update date for the oversight committee, I believe. Aside from that, I don't think any policies were amended at that meeting, which is cited. So yeah, aside from that, there are a couple of things, like sometimes people don't know how to spell organizational. So that was a couple fixes for that. And then there's less so issues with the bylaws. Actually, all the bylaws that they were cited were correct, which was nice. But some of the compositions of the committees and stuff are stuff we could maybe look to change. For example, I think events committee could use some more at-larges. Events committee is always at its best when it has the most ideas funneled into it as possible. I would know from being on it in 2 years and not providing that many ideas. So shout out to all my other at-larges who were a lot more creative than I was. But yeah, overall, a lot cleaner of a policy review than the previous ones I did, but still plenty of changes to be made.
Okay, awesome, thank you. Ben, you're next on the list.
Yeah, for orientation and training and privacy and information management ones that I did, they're all relatively simple fixes that need to be made. Like in OTP 5, the word committee is used when it should be the word department. There's some empty pages in privacy and information management. Other than that, really sort of more minor fixes that need to be made there. And yeah, the whole policy adoption dates are quite messed up.
I do want to flag one thing, which I thought was kind of funny, which is in regards to something very small. We can think about it. It's about keys. So I noticed something weird. Some policies say, and I think one of them is corporate policies, saying that, I mean, the VP internal is in charge of making sure like the process doesn't break down in terms of like people getting their keys and stuff. But if you look at orientation or retention, it says the board organizer is in charge of giving keys, which doesn't quite make sense. Also, as an executive, I did not receive my key from the board organizer because I don't think it's the board organizer's portfolio to get us keys. So I think there's some inconsistency there, and I think I have to do some digging on my end of my management team to figure out who is actually in charge of getting those keys, because we can't have one policy say it's the board organizer, another one saying that it's the VP internal, and then a third one saying it's the building manager, and a fourth one saying it's operations, which all happened simultaneously in different policies. So which one is the true one? We don't know. So I didn't really want to flag that in my review because I wasn't sure who is supposed to do it. But hopefully by next week I can report back and tell you who's actually in charge of keys, because it is kind of unclear. But yeah. Anybody else have anything to add? Any weird mistake noticed? Okay. If that is a no, that's good. We can probably move on to our next batch of policies, then we'll start signing that probably tomorrow or the day after. Please do also keep up with your bylaw review, because we do need to give something to members meeting planning. So do keep that in mind. But yeah, okay. If there is no more discussion on this, we can move on to section 11, which is our in-camera session. So the motion reads, be it resolved to go in camera for the remainder of the meeting. I will move. Can I get a second?
VP Finance.
I heard VP Math, I think that's funny. I'm gonna give it to Math. Open the floor for discussion. Seeing none. Seeing none, I'm going to vote seeking unanimous consent. If you wish to dissent, please raise your hand and get in chat. Seeing none, that is carried. I will now pause the recording. We'll be back. All right, seeing that we have all moved back. The next item on our agenda is item number 12, X camera. The motion reads, be it resolved to go X camera for the remainder of the meeting. I will move. Can I get a second?
VP Finance.
VP Finance seconds. Opening the floor for discussion on this. Seeing none, that carries unanimously. We can move on to our last item on the agenda, which is adjournment. The motion reads, be it resolved to adjourn this meeting at 4:38 p.m. I will move. Can I get a second?
Math.
Math seconds. Open the floor for discussion. Seeing none, this motion is carried unanimously, and we have officially adjourned the meeting. Thank you for joining us today, and have a great week.